we're back.
Thanks everyone for joining us here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'd like to welcome Deb Debare joining us from the Rhode Island Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Deb, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so we wanted to bring you in and have a conversation. Thank you again for joining us.
It's absolutely my pleasure. You know, they say October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but we have to always remember it happens every single month of the year.
I think that's a great point. Let's talk a little bit about just exactly what happens in our state and kind of what the trend has been. Let's talk a little bit about what domestic violence is, because I think some people might have an idea, but it runs a little bit deeper.
Right, that's exactly true. You know, most people think of domestic violence as a stereotype of somebody with broken arms, broken bones, black eyes. But the reality is there's a whole continuum of domestic violence. It starts often with emotional abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse. It can involve sexual abuse. There's a whole range of behaviors. But the bottom line is it's a pattern of behavior that involves controlling one person, a power over another person.
Power over another person. I do want to just mention before we go too far in here that if you or someone you know needs help or you think might need help in some way, you can contact Rhode Island's 24-hour-a-day helpline. It's 1-800-494-8100. The coalition also has a chat line that you can go to, so check out their webpage and they have people available as well. And we'll put up a link on our website in English and Spanish, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's take another look into this. Some people might be victims of abuse and might not realize it, right? Because they might not be getting physically abused. But you mentioned emotional abuse. You mentioned financial abuse. Let's talk a little bit about some of the warning signs.
Sure. You know, I think one thing that victims of abuse are experts at is minimizing their situation. It's a survival coping mechanism, actually. And so oftentimes people don't realize that they're in a very dangerous situation or that it's building over time. And it's really helpful for them to talk with someone or to have someone reflect back on what they're seeing. So some of the warning signs to look for are things like being isolated. If someone you know has a habit, for example, of not being able to go out after work with their friends or their family members, or if they don't have control over their own finances, if they don't have the ability to make decisions about what they want to spend money on. Those can be patterns or warning signs that the relationship is not healthy and is turning abusive.
So does it always get to the level, and this can go either way. I know Kate had an interview where with someone, because people don't, it's not always men abusing women. It can be women abusing men, it can be men abusing men, it can be women abusing women. It can go in many directions, right?
Right. Yeah, bottom line is that domestic abuse can happen to anyone in any kind of intimate relationship. And so the dynamic there is that if someone's in a relationship with a person that they love and trust, and it is an intimate relationship. So when it starts out that way, it's often hard for the victim to believe that this could actually be going bad or turning abusive. That's why it's so important to have a support group or to have someone to talk to or to have a confidential hotline available to just talk about your situation perhaps and get some reflections on what's really going on.
I like that idea, just having someone out there to talk to so you can hear yourself and you're saying it out loud. How important in your line of work when people are just able to verbalize what's happening to them, is that almost sometimes the first step?
You know, for many people it can be the first step. For many people it's more of a last step. You know, verbalizing it is often the last step in a long process where they may have been surviving and coping in a dangerous relationship for years, sometimes even decades. And it's when you actually can verbalize it that might be that step to help you get over that threshold and seek help.
It's incredible. And there are resources available in our state and every state. So if you are ready to make that step, there are resources available. So I was looking at the website in 2016, 8,710 individual victims of domestic violence received services from the Rhode Island Coalition and member agencies. What type of services do people use and can people get help with?
Well, we're very lucky in Rhode Island that there's a strong network of services available. So no matter what city or town you live in, we have a network of 9 member organizations. Together they provide shelter, transitional housing, advocates that can help you in court, whether you want to get a restraining order or whether it's a criminal justice proceeding. We have immigration advocacy available for victims that are dealing with immigration issues. There are programs for children who witness domestic violence. So we're really lucky. We do have quite a comprehensive net of services in place.
It seems all-encompassing.
Yeah, well, we try to be. We know we can't address all needs, and there still are some gaps in service that we're trying to address. But certainly, we will try to provide advocates and support services for any victim.
That's crucial to know. So, as we move forward, you know, the first step that you mentioned is just becoming aware of this. What is domestic violence? Who can be involved? Who can be impacted? You know, you hear about these months, but it's not just October. It's every month of the year. What can we do about ending domestic violence? Can we end it?
Well, I absolutely believe we can end it, and I think that's what keeps me so hopeful about doing this work, is if every single person became more informed and more aware of the warning signs, of the signals, and of what to do, of how to intervene. I know we could turn this around within a generation's time frame. So the first step is educate yourself, know what resources are in the community, teach our children, teach youngsters, even if you don't have children yourselves, you can have an impact on the next generation. Teach them what a healthy relationship looks like. Model healthy relationships. Stop sexism in its tracks when you hear people making sexist jokes or comments. It's all connected to our culture that just puts women down, and so until we can change that culture around, we still have a lot of work to do.
You know, I had an interesting discussion last week about sexual assault, sexual harassment, and it being kind of this cultural phenomena. How do you think that we can go about changing that? You just mentioned educating kids. Is it a deep-rooted issue, you think?
Oh, it's incredibly deep-rooted, and you know, we have to realize it's been around for hundreds of years, and so we can't expect it to become history in just a matter of a year or two. It's one of these things that is going to take a long time, but it's not an insurmountable problem. I think just by chipping away at it, addressing individual instances of domestic abuse and sexual assault when they occur, and putting out strong messages about changing our society's cultural norms. That's a two-pronged approach where we really need to address the problem that way.
Interesting. As we work to approach this, there is a campaign which I think is really interesting. You've done a great job promoting this on No More Silence. How does that work, you think? Do you think it's important that everybody speak up? Because it's hard when you see someone being put down by someone else, or you see someone show up in your office with maybe a bruise, or they're covering something up. That's been the case in these cases publicly, you know, well, I didn't want to get involved, or it's not my business, or that's how their relationship works. Is this how we go about changing things, by people speaking up and imparting themselves in other people's relationships? Is this how we break it? Is this how we change things?
Well, it's a really critical piece of changing the cultural norms, because we can't put the burden and expect victims to be the ones to change society. It really is every single one of ours responsibility. So our No More Silence campaign is really designed to help everyone realize that not only do we want victims to feel safe speaking up and have the support that they need, but we want everyone, bystanders, to speak up. If you know someone or you think someone might be in a dangerous relationship, we want all bystanders to know what to do. You know, we want colleagues at work to know what to do if someone that you're working with you feel may be in a dangerous situation at home. And we want folks to understand that it's not just a private matter. If everyone just got involved, we'd really be able to make a huge difference.
And how do you think this year has been? We've seen, because I think that the sexual assault and the sexual harassment is all intertwined with domestic violence as well. And correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like it's all tied together.
Yep.
Are we kind of, do you think, on this brink of change, or is it all building up? You know, this year has been very turbulent, at least playing out in the media, people are speaking up, people are speaking out. Does that empower people who have gone through this?
Oh, absolutely. I think the hashtag no more, hashtag Me Too, those campaigns are just a symbol of how prevalent the problem is, and how once victims feel empowered to speak up and speak out, there's no turning back. What we can do as a society is when people speak out about their own situations, is we can support them. Not every victim is going to feel comfortable speaking up and speaking out about it, and that's okay. Every person's situation is different. But as a society, if we provide support to everyone who speaks out, and that's the best way to turn the tide. And I agree with you, it really is where I feel like we're at a tipping point in a sense, and there's no turning back. Once this issue becomes talked about as frequently as it is now, you can't put it back in a can.
I agree with you. I don't know how we would turn back. The scary thing about domestic violence is people lose their lives. People are losing their lives, and it's pretty terrifying. I know that the coalition had a part in changing laws in Rhode Island to take guns away from those who had been found guilty of domestic violence abuse. Talk to me a little bit about why that's important in this state.
Sure. It's a common sense piece of legislation. When you think about it, we know that domestic violence and guns are a lethal combination. Victims of domestic violence who are in households where there are guns available are much more likely to end up seriously injured or killed. And so when we know that someone has already been convicted of a domestic violence misdemeanor, or if there's already been a protective order taken out against them, it's just common sense. Take the guns away. Let's try to minimize the homicides, minimize the serious injuries to the best of our ability. Now, I'm not saying this is going to be a magic cure-all. We can't predict or protect every single victim in this way. People have often said to me, if someone is determined to get a gun, they're going to get one anyway. And I know that that's true to some extent, but we can certainly minimize the cases and protect a number of victims who are in danger.
I can see that point. What was it like for you to get this, to work with the organizations that you worked with and to get that bill passed? It just happened in September, right, in special session?
That's right. Yeah. We've been working on this type of legislation for years, this specific piece of legislation for 4 years. And so people often don't realize how hard it is to get a controversial piece of legislation through. At one point earlier I just said it was a very simple piece of legislation, but sometimes it's the ones that seem simple to me that are actually the most controversial. And certainly this one was. It had a number of perspectives were raised about people's right to own firearms, and the cost of storing guns and firearms, because all those issues were taken into account. So there were a number of versions of the legislation. Finally, a version came through that both chambers, the House and the Senate, agreed to. And so we were very pleased that when they came back into special session that it was passed. We're hoping this will save lives. We know it's going to save lives. And we're just looking forward to continuing to strengthen the laws to protect victims, because there's still a lot more that we need to do. We know that.
Definitely. So a lot more that we can all do to help take part and to help people feel safe in their own community. As I mentioned before, I had a conversation last week about sexual assault and sexual harassment, and just how it's been, by people speaking up, it kind of dominated the headlines, right? I had this conversation with an assistant professor at Providence Colleges. She's the director of women's studies there. We talked a little bit about just how language can really make a difference. And so I thought it was kind of interesting. I was reading something and also found this on your website. I don't know where it is on my notes, but just how we talk about domestic violence, instead of saying, making the question of, asking a question, well, why did, we'll just say in case if it's a man and a woman, why did the woman choose to stay with the abuser? Why aren't we asking, why did the man abuse the woman?
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, right? So if we look at this from a perspective of language, do we need to start changing the way that we ask questions and the way that we use language when we're approaching domestic violence? Could that help change?
You know, absolutely. I think for decades we've asked the question, why doesn't she leave? And that puts the whole burden on the victim, when this problem is not the victim's problem, it's the abuser's problem. And what we need to do is ask, why is he abusing her, and why is society accepting it, tolerating it, turning the other way? You know, for decades, I mean really for hundreds of years, we have turned away from this issue and said, oh, it's just a private matter. Well, it's not a private matter when so many thousands and thousands of victims of domestic violence are being hurt every single day.
So maybe taking a new approach of all of us, just the way we word things, and I think it's an interesting matter just to think about, and maybe starting to implement the way we talk about things. We can all do that.
Yep, it's the way we talk about them, it's the images that we see, it's the role models that we can present to our kids. You know, it's all facets of trying to really change the culture. So certainly words and conversations are a real important part of that.
And that's something simple that we can all do, is just start working on how we talk about things. So again, if you or someone you know may or may just need someone to talk to, of course you can call the Rhode Island 24/7 helpline. It's 1-800-494-8100. Also, my understanding there's a candlelight vigil coming up.
Yep, we have a number of activities going on around the state during the remainder of the month, because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So check out our website. You can check out nomoreri.org, and that can connect you with local events that are going on in your community.
Perfect. Well, Deb, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great discussion, and we'll have a link to their website as well. And of course, you can go there, get resources, and if you need any more information, of course, we have a lot, just like you mentioned, here in Rhode Island.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming in, Deb.
Sure,
I appreciate
my pleasure.
it.
Yep.
All right, everyone, please hang tight as we get set up for our next guest here on Go Local Live.